test you two. What is cold but still burns? What will eat you if you drink it? What?
Acid.
It's acid.
I am not done. What is... Wait, did I say the thing about cold but still burns?
Yes.
Right.
No.
Because it's acid.
No. Okay, it's acid. I'm dropping you in a pool of acid.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City. And yes, we are officially back to Gotham City. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
The audience has spoken, we have listened, and we have watched the very first episode of Harley Quinn, the comedic animated series that can be found on Max now. They've done like 3 seasons, 3 or 4.
They're in 4, I think.
And we are starting with season 1, episode 1. There is a lot to talk about. I will preface this conversation by letting the audience know, if they've not watched this episode already, I wouldn't call this show child-friendly. This is a crass show, lots of profanity, lots of over-the-top, cartoonish, Looney-Tunes-esque violence that usually ends in blood and bones cracking and occasionally entrails popping out, but it's all done comedically. It's meant to be funny, and it is. It's very funny. But this episode alone made me think, A, the audience chose the right thing for us to cover, and B, we're going to have a lot to talk about when it comes to Harley Quinn and her menagerie of characters, some allies, some foes, some former allies, now foes. And I will say that, just in my opinion, after having only seen this one episode, now I know that we had seen a few episodes when it first aired a few years ago. We have no memory of that, really.
I completely, like I do with many shows, I completely erased it from my brain bank. I do remember this episode. This first episode that we saw is very memorable, and I'll talk a little bit about why. So I do remember this episode quite a bit. And I'll also say, for folks who are joining us this season, the way that we run these episodes is that we do this as supplemental material, but you're not necessarily going to miss out if you're not watching the companion source material. So if you don't have access to HBO Max, if you haven't seen the Harley Quinn animated series, I wouldn't worry too much. We're going to pick up on the kind of essentials when it comes to psychology and mental health and well-being, and we'll do our best to summarize and even bring in clips from the scenes that we find important to really drive those points home. So it's extra credit if you want to watch the show before listening to the episode, but I wouldn't say it's going to be necessary.
Let's also give some information out to those just now joining us. We are a podcast that, of course, sort of analyzes pop culture through the critical lens of a clinical psychologist. We start from beginning to end, so we cannot speak about anything that we know is coming up. But we allow those things to happen, and then Drea will analyze all of those things as we go. Our patrons over at patreon.com/Arkham Sessions chose Harley Quinn after it came in, I think, second in every poll for the last 2 or 3. It finally won, and so we are finally covering it. Getting to come back to Batman and Gotham City is exciting. I will let folks know that we're doing something a little different. Folks can now see us on video as we record our podcast.
Wait, what?
I'm sorry, not as we record.
This are we live? You did not.
Folks
You
can
did
now
not tell me.
see us on YouTube and on Patreon. The former season, which was X-Men, the animated series, season 1, you and I tried a little experiment. We decided to record our podcast. And up until now, those videos have all been on patreon.com / Arkham Sessions, specifically for a certain tier of patron. We are now turning those on publicly, but you'll be one season behind. So if you want to keep up with us, come to patreon.com / Arkham Sessions and join that tier, and you'll get to see these episodes as we video or as we do them on video every other week. And otherwise, join us over at YouTube, find the Arkham Sessions, and you can now watch our episodes. But again, you'll be a season behind. I kind of want to jump right in.
Look, I will say that returning to a DC show really felt like going home. Just the characters, the familiarity. You know, it's kind of it has this. Yes, we really will get into it. It's not a reboot. It's not as if these are reimagined characters.
No.
But there's a freshness to this. It's really contextualized in, you know, it came out in 2019. So the year that it came out, and I would imagine the next few seasons that follow are very aware, very bright, savvy around the social context that it sits in. And I would say this about most shows anyway. We would probably go back and recognize this with Batman the Animated Series. But there was a sense of just a coziness around, like, oh, these are my clients. I know these characters.
These folks.
I know them very well. So
for the longest time on various social medias, you were Arkham Asylum Doc. So if anyone knows the characters we are currently investigating, it would be you.
Yes, anything about Arkham Asylum it would bring actual joy to my heart. So watching this or rewatching this was a delight. There are a couple things I do want to say. It's not a reboot. So this is a continuation of Harley Quinn's story. And so
from Batman the Animated Series?
No.
It's sort of an Elseworlds. It's another universe.
It manages, here's I guess what I mean by that. It manages to preserve and identify a history that she has, especially with the Joker. So they don't change her history of being in a toxic relationship.
Right.
And yet, even in the first episode, what I can tell that it's going to do is center her in that story where she reclaims her power. She begins to reassess her relationships. It's really, I think, such a smart way to take the existing material and not erase it or try to, again, create a different narrative from it, but really look at it directly and give us somewhat of a realistic, restorative story about Harley Quinn. And I really like that about her. This isn't the first version of that in the comics dating back 10, 15 years ago. Writers did start to empower her and recenter her as a main character. There was, when the Black Label came out for DC Comics, they had a story called Harleen, which again, that was a retelling of her story, but from her perspective.
Yeah.
So again, this isn't the first time that we're seeing a reclaiming of her narrative in this way, but I think it's done brilliantly.
Yeah, this reminds me of the Jimmy Palmiotti, Amanda Conner run, which started in 2013, where it took a decidedly more humorous turn, and she started to reclaim her life, basically going independent and become. I think she moved to Brooklyn or something, and then we followed her adventures in almost a Deadpool kind of way, where there was a little fourth wall breaking from time to time, but it's a series that I think that we are going to fall in love with more and more as we cover it. I kind of want to let you take the lead on this one, because from the moment it starts, we start seeing a lot of real life psychology. We start seeing, yes, there's violence, yes, there's profanity, yes, it's over the top, but the underlying current is very real. And so I kind of want you to talk about the fact that the first thing we see is Harley ambushing a boat full of the one percenters, the millionaires, the billionaires. They're even making fun of the fact that there's a stack of money on the boat, and that they're basically screwing over normal people. And Harley decides to kill them all. None of them are scared of her. They all know her as the humorous sidekick to the Joker. But none of them are particularly scared of her until she decides to start taking a mallet to them and make them scared of her. I wouldn't say that it necessarily works until the host of the party sickeningly removes his bloody face, and we see that the Joker has been wearing the skin.
Not the first time.
Not the first time.
Not the first time we've seen the Joker wear.
So usually it's his
face.
own skin. Usually it's his own face that he is stapled onto his own head.
But he would not wince at wearing someone's skin.
Yes, but he pulls it off like you would a ski mask. It's all one piece, and it's been. I can only imagine the technique used to properly remove this from his victim's skull. But he puts it on and takes it off like a mask. And he's very amused by this. Everyone else is horrified. Harley, more than anything, is just upset because she feels like she has earned her chance to be a villain. And once again, Joker's got to steal her spotlight. Talk about Harley's desire to break out, not away from Joker yet. She's still very much madly in love with him. Madly being the operative word. But she wants to prove herself as worthy of being his partner. Talk about Harley at this point.
This is a really critical scene, and it reminds me of some of the original animated series episodes that involve this couple. And I've written about this, we've talked about this, where there's this, you mentioned this Looney-Toones-esque kind of type of humor, the slapstick, the hijinks, the physical humor, all of this is happening. But then, and we can't not mention Paul Dini as the creator of Harley Quinn.
Yes.
And both Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, establishing her original personality, somebody who is full of delight and just wants to experience delightful things.
Yeah.
And yes, has this relationship with the Joker that is toxic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Here we're establishing that she's very aspirational. She wants recognition. She wants to be in the spotlight. And look, there's nothing wrong with wanting attention and wanting to be seen and heard and validated. Like, some of this is just the human experience. I want to have a sense of purpose. Right now, Harley's sense of purpose is co-creating chaos with the Joker.
Yeah.
And do I think that Harley cares about the money? No. Do I think she cares about creating disruption and pain? No. Do I think that she is viscerally interested in human suffering? Like, how some people really want other people to feel hurt?
Yeah.
Actually, no. I don't think she wants any of these things. I think she wants a sense of purpose and power and control, and that she's effective in something.
But right now, she is misinterpreting self-worth by pleasing Mr. J.
You're right. It's getting all caught up and twisted up and entangled in being in the eyes, being recognized by the Joker. And these are all the things that ostensibly he cares about. How many people do I have to kill for him to notice my assets? How much blood do I need to shed for him to really see that I'm valuable to him?
But he doesn't even really give her that chance. He begins killing them because he sees past her. I don't want to say through her. He just sees past her. To him, this whole experience is fun, but only for him. It's really not for her at all.
And I think, and this is why, as we start to cover this show, while we've covered these topics before, I have a sense that a lot of our coverage in the season will be around themes and issues of survivorship.
Yeah.
Survivors of sexual abuse, physical abuse, relational abuse, gaslighting, all these things. We're going to talk about it all. We're going to talk about consent. We're going to talk about gaslighting. We're going to talk about power. We're going to talk about recovery. I think these are going to be themes throughout our coverage of the show.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate about the very first episode is that it successfully gave us a snapshot just in that scene you're talking about on the deck of the ship. It gave us the dynamic of their relationship. It didn't have to give us all the origins and what happened. It'll do that later maybe, but it just gave us a snapshot of Harley Quinn is seen as nothing more than a weapon for the Joker, a tool, a body. There isn't genuine love there. Meanwhile, she is codependent. She is the giver. She wants to take care of him. She wants to preserve how he is, and she gives excuses for him. And, we see that within the first 5 minutes of the show, which I think is, this is the way that they're then going to unpack that later. They needed to have that in the beginning.
And I didn't mean to make light of your use of the word codependent. I chuckled when you said it, because I'm reminded of literally a moment later on in this show where the word is spoken, and you immediately showed me where you already had this written down in your notes.
Yeah, I think you have the clip of her essentially self-diagnosing.
Yes, but I'm going to hold on to that for a minute because I do feel like that is a breakthrough.
Yeah, a lot happens before then.
Between
when
now
that
and then.
happened, I had looked down at my notes and saw that I wrote the exact words that she uses to describe her mental health, and I chuckled as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means about me or the show, but I'm telling you,
well, somebody got it right.
Yes.
Someone, like you were seeing something, someone got it right. And I think of the panels we've been doing, both at Comic-Con, WonderCon, and just throughout the years, we have always talked about the desire to want to see it done right, handled properly. And if you're going to give it a name, give us realistic symptoms and signs that that's what the person is living with. And you saw the symptoms and the signs and you wrote it down, and then they gave it a name. And you're like, wow.
That's what I came up with.
It's working. Yes.
Right.
Yes. This wasn't some random, you so crazy diagnosis.
Yeah.
This was something very specific.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of that in this show. The use of words like insane and crazy as insults or just kind of thrown in there. I think there's a lot of smart writing here. There's a responsible writing, and it's also incredibly entertaining. I was laughing a lot through the show.
Yeah.
So
but could it be that the reason insanity is not brought up in a derogatory term, in a derogatory way so much, is because we are seeing this through the perspective of those who would be criminally insane. So they don't necessarily see themselves as what would you say? Like they wouldn't see themselves in a derogatory manner.
Sure.
They are the folks who are in Arkham. In fact, we get to meet several of them because Batman shows up and ruins their day. Joker escapes on a submarine, allows Harley to take the not the blame, but allows her to step between Joker escaping and Batman in order to give him time to get away. Yeah,
this is not uncommon, and she's experienced this before where he gets to escape and but he promises
her that she won't spend a single night in Arkham. 1 year later, after having been in Arkham the entire time, and Joker in no way, shape, or form showing any signs of coming to help her. Poison Ivy, who she's befriended in Arkham, is actually the one who helps her escape. The two of them leave Arkham together. Mm-hmm. And in this particular show, Poison Ivy appears to be the character who is the voice of reason for Harley, would you say?
I would even say more than the voice of reason. When someone like Harley, someone who has this long history of relational abuse, starts to reckon with who they are and what so-called mistakes they've made, and that self-talk, that internal critic, all of these definitely hard things. It's more than just the voice of reason that can help. It's someone, it's their social support. It's an advocate. It's somebody who is patient enough to be around after so many times saying, yeah, I think you're being victimized here. And she does it in the beginning of their time together. Yeah. Poison Ivy says calmly and clearly that this guy's not the one. Harley then makes excuses for him.
Defends him, yeah.
There's something that she specifically says, you don't know him like I do, which is a trapping of, it's that entanglement. It's that feeling of I'm special and no one understands us. And so we're alone on our island and, they don't get our thing. And that, we'll unwrap this a little more.
Well, let's go ahead and unwrap that because we're moving right into the next phase. This is a year later or throughout the year, Poison Ivy has consistently told her, why are you perseverating over this guy who's clearly an abuser toward you?
And she does everything a good advocate would do, which is, when the person resists, you persist. She provides a house Harley moves in with Poison Ivy and a talking plant named Frank.
Yes. Who's very much like the Audrey 2 of, very foul-mouthed and likes to eat people, clearly taken from Little Shop of Horrors. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, or he's sort of like Poison Ivy's pet.
Yeah.
And
roommate.
Roommate?
Yeah.
Okay.
He even says that he didn't ask for a roommate when Harley's sitting next to him. And he seems to be autonomous enough that I wouldn't call him a pet. In fact, he even feeds himself with people he shouldn't be. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of caretaking, and that's okay. Somebody's in need, and they're going through a period of recovery and kind of reestablishing who they are, their independence. But at that point, Harley hadn't completely separated from the Joker. She tells Poison Ivy, he's why I am who I am today. Yeah. I'm, it's again this language that it's that codependency. I can't exist without this other person. There's that entanglement. There's that inability to see yourself as separate from the other person.
Right.
And yeah, getting into it, this is, if we haven't been clear about this is an abusive relationship.
Right.
And much of this, it's romantic. So some of this is physical and sexual abuse. This is ongoing. We get the sense that this has been ongoing.
So just so we're clear, when you say it's romantic, what does that mean?
It's romantic
in terms of the style of abuse?
Sure. Like, this is not a, parent to child or sibling to sibling or,
got it.
Like romantic.
So it's like domestic abuse, not necessarily romantic abuse. Because he really shows no signs of romance toward her one way or another, but she has, for whatever reason, fallen in love with him. So for her, it's romance, but for him, she's just one more thing that's in his arsenal.
It's his version of what romance would be. Right. Yeah. So let's break it down. This version of Joker.
Although that's something that we can debate here in a couple of minutes.
I know where you're going with that. This version of Joker is narcissistic. Mm-hmm. He's an egomaniac. He is about establishing and maintaining power. Mm-hmm. He is, I'd say, probably a psychopath. We need more information, but willingly injuring and killing people.
Yeah.
With no remorse.
With no remorse whatsoever.
I'm going to say
laughing.
A psychopath.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a sense of guilt or remorse for his actions. He doesn't take accountability for his actions. He thinks he's above the law. He thinks he's above the rules. He can do these things and doesn't deserve the consequences. Whereas someone like Harley, he'd say, well, she can sit in Arkham for a year. She's deserving of that, or I don't care about that. That's
and I'm not even going to think about her.
I'm not
because I've got my mind set on other things.
Right. So this is an issue around intersectional power. So with the two of them as a so-called couple, mm-hmm. the intersectional power I'm referring to is that the difference between her power and his power is one of the reasons why this abuse is abuse. So for instance, when I say intersectional power, I mean sort of all the different ways in which he has superior control, ability, opportunity. He has his own lair, right? So I don't know what we're calling it here, but it's like the Joker's hideout. Oh. He runs that joint. He's the Prince of Chaos. He has wealth. I'm guessing all of that wealth was not fairly acquired.
Yeah.
But he has all of this wealth. He's a man, so there's a gender dynamic where he's more powerful in this social situation. Physically, he might be more powerful physically. He might have more access to weapons. We see that he certainly controls the henchmen, so right. He has social power. Right. So I can name thing after thing that gives him more intersectional power than she has. And I think it's important to name that because one could say, well, Harley can walk away anytime. One could say, well, she just needs to fight back. Mm. Or one could say, well, why doesn't she just leave? And I think that looking at these dynamics of power, the things that maybe were so obvious become not so obvious. They're more nuanced. They're really, again, entangled in his ability to even just use subtle words to control her, to abuse her, to mm-hmm. manipulate her, to gaslight her. Mm-hmm. And I think that's done here. That's shown here in a way where the audience picks up on it pretty quickly. And we realize this isn't a situation where this woman can simply move into Poison Ivy's apartment and be done.
Yeah.
A lot more has to unravel. A lot more empowerment has to happen. And it's not going to be all done in the first episode, although a fair amount of separation
steps are taken.
Done.
Yeah. So I want to ask you in the real world to talk a little bit about someone who would find themselves in this position. What is she currently going through? Because there's a lot of denial that he's even an abuser at all. Mm-hmm. And a lot of hesitation to take that step. She's been sort of I would say that there's illusion there. She is I don't want to say delusional, but she clearly sees a relationship that isn't there. Now, some people would say, people in your field would say that could even be diagnosed as borderline. Like if she sees a relationship that isn't even necessarily really there, is she also potentially showing signs of something like this?
Inflating the romance, or certainly exaggerating the closeness and intimacy that doesn't exist. Yes, that's a feature of borderline personality disorder. I think we need to pause on that for now, because I don't know that we have enough information just from this first
But he's
episode.
definitely steering her down a path. When given the opportunity to leave, he will do whatever he can to prevent her from leaving. He needs the relationship, it seems, almost as much as she does, but for entirely different reasons.
Right.
For him, like you said, it's a power thing. It's I've got to maintain control over this person. Mm-hmm. For her, she is interpreting that as romantic gestures, and that's unfortunate.
It is, and you mentioned this word delusion. At this time, the reason I wouldn't say, and I know you were hesitating to actually use that word.
Yeah.
The reason I'm not seeing a delusion is that there's this really nice scene, and maybe this is the time to play this clip between Poison Ivy and Harley. When Harley is safely in Poison Ivy's apartment and they start to talk about her abuser and how she feels about her abuser, there's this exchange between Dr. Harleen Quinzel, who, I said that weird, Dr. Harley, I said that weird, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, and Harley Quinn of today.
Yeah.
And
there's a moment where they are at Ivy's home, and Ivy reminds Harley that she was once Ivy's psychologist.
Psychiatrist.
Well, okay. So that's something I want to ask you about, because it bounces back and forth. Like, for instance, in Harley's origin story in the comics, she was called a psychologist.
Right.
She's also, in certain writers' interpretations, been a psychiatric intern. So she has been someone who has not yet gotten her doctorate. But I think most people like to play with her more as someone who has officially gone through and gotten her PhD or MD, depending on whether she's a psychiatrist, psychologist, etc.
I'm going to say something wild here, which is it kind of doesn't matter.
Right.
But you're right.
Well, what's the difference? For people who don't necessarily understand, like, I understand a psychiatrist can prescribe meds, whereas a psychologist cannot.
There are more nuances, because in some states, some psychologists can prescribe meds.
Oh, okay.
It's getting complicated.
But when
a clinical
people,
psychologist is someone with a PhD in clinical psychology, and in order to autonomously treat patients, you also have a license.
Okay.
So you have a PhD and a license. So that's usually what profession someone has when you or what background they would have when they have the profession of being a psychologist. A psychiatrist has an MD, so that means that they went through medical school and did all of the foundational work, training experience, internship, residency to get to that point, and then has a specialty, just like any MD would have a specialty area. That would be their specialty, and they see patients, they treat patients, they prescribe medication. They also do counseling, although depending on where you're being treated, if you're in an inpatient setting, you might have psychologists there doing all of your counseling, and your psychiatrist.
That's something I just recently learned, actually. Something like you and I would watch TV, and occasionally you will point out things that I didn't even realize. When you see on film and television people going like, oh, I'm going to my psychiatrist, and then you see them on the couch being therapized by someone, that's not even necessarily what a psychiatrist's job is.
It could be.
But you were like, sometimes a psychiatrist might come in for 15 minutes like a doctor would.
And just kind of check on symptomatology, progress, important critical things like any recent trauma, suicidality, family concerns, something that might be relevant within the last month or so. Psychiatrists don't tend to have as frequent sessions with their patients. And, I'd say...
So you wouldn't necessarily come back every week to a psychiatrist, but you might to a psychologist.
You might for a psychologist. And I'd say in some treatment centers, in some regions, in some clinics, you might actually see your psychiatrist for weekly counseling.
Okay.
And again, it depends on the actual treatment center. It depends on the kind of treatment you're getting. It depends on the state's regulations around who can do what.
Right.
The good news is that hopefully, I'm saying hopefully, whoever you are seeing, they are credentialed. You can ask for their credentials. You can look them up. All of us are registered state by state and have to follow very rigorous standards to get that actual license. And then we have to renew our licenses. So I don't mean to get off track a little bit, but if anyone's concerned whether or not they're seeing one or another, you look up their credentials, ensure that they are renewing their credentials, and then ask them, what is the scope of service? And if you feel like you need more support or more frequent support, you can get a referral for a counselor. There's also master's level counselors, therapists who are credentialed, trained, have licenses to do incredibly effective therapy. So you don't have to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist to have therapy. So these are all the nuances.
Yeah, there are a lot of nuances. I'm glad that you helped clear that up a little bit. I imagine that a show like this won't necessarily do that, won't necessarily educate us in that way. So I'm glad that you're here to do that. But we should say that Harleen was Poison Ivy's psychiatrist or psychologist. We're not 100% sure, unless she actually
said psychiatrist. I'm pretty sure she said psychiatrist.
Okay, and she has a photograph with her framed, and it was basically because Harleen was able to break through with Poison Ivy when no one else could, and actually got her to a point where she can now hang around people and not just plants. She admits that she still hates it, but she has moved forward and is able to do it. So Harleen was actually a good psychiatrist at the time before falling in love with this villain. And she's trying to remind Harley of that. Harley looks at this photograph, and the photograph begins speaking to her as Harleen. And this was something that I very much appreciated. I want to play it for folks here. This is the audio you've been alluding to. Let's take a listen, and then let's talk about what this scene means. Here we go.
So, this patient of mine, she's fixated on a murderous psychopath and won't end their relationship no matter how terribly he treats her.
Oh, easy. Classic abusive codependency. You just gotta show her there's no future with him and she needs to end it and find her own identity and... Oh, I see. You're smart. I know. I'm you.
What I really, really appreciated about this moment is that she is not being swayed by an outside source. Ivy has gone so far as to basically give kind of an intervention of sorts by sitting her down and having a very real conversation with her after having broken her out of prison after a year when her abuser wouldn't. And that intervention will actually continue throughout this episode, in a manner of speaking. But it's not Ivy that's getting through to Harley. It's Harley's own internal self reminding her of her own value and of sort of saying, look, let's really think about this. All the stuff that you are exhibiting is something you know about and you know how to treat
You're
this.
the expert
Yes.
in these things and you should recognize it. So
Yeah.
I want to say two things. One is what I love about the show is that this Harley is smart, educated, intelligent, brilliant, has social intelligence as well as book smarts, is all around a pretty deep person. And yet this is a good reminder that anybody can be a victim of abuse.
Yeah.
You could have an MD and be the victim of abuse. There's actual studies that demonstrate that people women especially, women with higher degrees, PhDs and MDs, are more susceptible to interpersonal violence and have higher rates of this. And it's kind of like you scratch your head a little bit. That's counterintuitive. You're so-called smart and you know it. You know these things. Why are you in these abusive relationships? And a lot of it comes down to the likelihood that their power, by being educated, having these degrees, having wealth, their power intimidates some partners, usually male partners, and these male partners find ways to overpower them. And a lot of times that's through physical abuse or emotional abuse, right? So it kind of fits the research that someone as educated and brilliant as Harley would fall into an abusive relationship.
That's interesting.
And not recognize the signs. Now, if this were her patient, she would recognize the signs in a second.
But it's hard to look at yourself and see that.
It is. I think it's also showing us, we all this is why I like the show. We all make mistakes. We're not perfect. We can come back from these setbacks and we don't have to be defined by these offenders. The thing that is also really cool, I'm a big fan of these tropes around like the embodiment of self-talk, like the talking to yourself, seeing, The Boys is another show that does this with Homelander. Moon Knight, that Marvel show, did it quite a bit with the main character.
Also noir. Black Noir has some interesting...
Oh, yeah.
Like in the last season, especially, I don't want to give anything away.
We don't cover the boys on this show.
But I mean, but there is self-talk.
Yes.
In that same sort of way.
I actually it's a trope, but I really like it because I've actually written about this a little bit. It has the ability to show us that, yes, sometimes we need to talk to ourselves. We need to get to know ourselves better and build our self-awareness by sitting with our thoughts, our feelings, our sense of self.
Yeah.
And, the symbology of that in these different shows, looking into a picture and talking to your past self is that kind of an exercise. It's a very therapeutic thing to do. So I like that they did that. And you're right. It wasn't Poison Ivy driving this point home. You have to know this. You're smarter than this. But it's her own past self saying, widen your eyes.
Yeah.
Look around you. Look at what's happening.
Yeah.
Your past self wouldn't do. Then there's this sense of like, is your past self a better person than you are now? No, you're not broken, but your past self has the wisdom that sometimes maybe you've gotten away from yourself a little bit. So that was nice to see.
The intervention continues because Harley decides to pay Joker a visit and she formally breaks up with him. Now, this is what I find fascinating as well, because in that audio we heard codependent. Mm-hmm. Well, he is as well. And so...
Is he?
Well, but so here's the thing. When she breaks up, he then turns it back on her and says, good, I'm glad you're doing this. I was going to do it as well. And it's very much a reverse psychology with the hopes of A, saving face? Probably not. He's not someone who cares.
Sure.
But B, keeping her on the hook. He wants her to stay, and he thinks that by saying that it's his idea to break up, that she is then going to want to remain the victim. I do think that he values her, and this is going to sound really weird. I think he does value her as a victim.
Wait.
That's why I said
what?
That's why I said it's going to sound really weird. Imagine if he would not take the time to treat any of those other thugs the same way that he treats her. I think she symbolizes something else than just one of the other henchmen.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so while it's atrocious, I think she does hold a higher tier in the tier system of Joker's weird
I mean,
view of his army.
Without getting out of our PG rating.
Yeah.
And as we show clips, we'll probably need to bleep out those F
bleep
words,
some stuff.
right?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, we try to keep the show pretty
Occasionally
clean.
you'll slip
I know.
one of those in there.
I'm the worst one of us. Look, she gratifies him in ways that these henchmen are not going to gratify him.
Right.
So there's elements here of a narcissist like him wants to be adored, wants to be pleased, wants to be treated like a god, and she does that.
Is that also a codependency, though? Is that
not for him? He's not codependent on her. No, I wouldn't say that.
So you wouldn't say, and this could just be me, grasping, but you wouldn't say that his narcissism has also created a codependency in someone that will give him those things that he needs or that he feels he needs. So if he needs the adoration, but he's not getting it from anyone else, he will do everything he can to keep that other person
Not really,
close.
because the codependency, and by the way, codependency is not a diagnosis, but the codependency style or dynamic is usually when one person has some kind of condition or illness or difficulty, a lot of challenges that they're suffering, they're struggling, they make mistakes, they need someone else to keep them in line, keep them good. And that's not, I wouldn't say that that's reversed for Harley.
Okay.
Does Harley have her own mental health struggles? Of course. But Harley's not the kind of person that, maybe Poison Ivy could potentially become codependent, but I don't see that happening.
Right.
So no, it's not both ways. It's usually not both ways like that. Where I think we're seeing a dynamic here is, in addition to having this power over her, he is likely wanting her around because of his narcissistic needs. This is someone who can't be by himself. So I agree with you.
So that's not codependency.
I agree with you on the sense that he cannot be by himself.
Yeah.
He constantly needs someone to assure him, to glorify him, to agree with him when he has these statements that he's the best, that he's unstoppable, that he's the
number one
worst
villain in
Like
Gotham
I want to
City.
say the worst. He's the best. He's the worst. Like he's the best villain, right?
Yeah.
And we see even in this scene an example of Darvo. Have we talked about Darvo yet?
Darvo sounds very sounds very familiar to me, but remind folks and me what Darvo means.
So Darvo is an acronym that stands for deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. Darvo. And it's a form of gaslighting, essentially.
I was going to say, this sounds very much like gaslighting.
It's when a conflict happens and we see Harley standing her ground and wanting to change the dynamic and change the power situation. And where the Joker basically says, no, you're not entangled in this. I'm not power. I don't have control over you. You can go. So that's the deny. The attack comes in the form of, I mean, it's a softer attack. We've seen harder attacks. So this is a softer attack of, actually, what would happen if, like, let me introduce some things that maybe you're doing that, like, you should have done this earlier. Like, what's wrong with you? And then reversing, now I'm the victim and you're the perpetrator, you're the offender. This is not a one-time thing. Darvo is a pattern of behavior where someone with more power will maintain that power over the person that they're victimizing time and time again. And that's why when we say, gosh, Harley seems confused. Harley seems like she keeps believing these things are not grounded in reality. Yeah. It's from a long period. It's a long relationship with someone using this Darvo dynamic, this mechanism to keep control over her.
Right.
And when someone would ask me, like, what is the point of doing this? Because sometimes it's very intentional. It's all about control. And he does it like so successfully, like smoothly, flawlessly. He does this in this scene to keep her from leaving. He's basically manipulating her to believe that the best option would be to stay with him.
Yeah.
And they end up in this emotional release. There's this, the tension comes down because then they're reunited. They're physically, they're making out, they're bonded again, and all the endorphins come through. So from a biological perspective and an emotional perspective, what just happened was that Darvo dynamic was just rewarded and they both feel good. And then there goes the cycle again. Meanwhile, the rest of us in Poison Ivy are just grabbing our heads like, oh my gosh, why is this happening again? This was bonkers. This was wild. I don't know what else to do.
Yeah.
They deserve each other, walk away.
So the ruse continues. Ultimately, Batman and Harley are captured by the Riddler, and they are each held in canisters, big bubbles hanging over vats of acid. And Riddler says, you're given the chance to decide who lives and who dies. Do you save Harley Quinn or do you save Batman? And this is a surprisingly, for Harley, not so much for us, this is a surprisingly difficult decision for the Joker. Joker ultimately chooses Batman.
Wait, I don't think it's surprisingly difficult.
Well, what I mean by that, no, I said not for us.
I don't think it's difficult for the Joker.
I think you're right, except he does delay. He does delay, and he's like,
honestly,
Harley
I think
is
that
left.
I think that's a performance.
And that very well could be. Yeah. What I mean is Harley expects him to immediately say, oh, I'm going to save Harley. But instead he says Batman, because the idea of the Riddler being able to take credit for having killed Batman is absurd to the Joker. And he's like, well, I'll just find another Harley. Go ahead and kill her. Right. In fact, he doesn't even call her by name. He objectifies her by saying, kill the broad. And as a result, the bubble with Batman drops, a seal it comes over the vat of acid, and Batman is rescued. Harley is dropped, and she drops toward the acid. Now.
No, she's in the acid.
No, hold on. She drops toward the acid. We then cut away, as she's falling, to Joker running out the door, and Batman chases him. So Batman's not even interested in saving Harley as she's heading toward this vat of acid. She falls into it, and immediately everything becomes a little bit more clear to her as she's in this vat. Up to this point, she had been delusional. She had believed that at some point in time earlier, prior to the episode beginning, the Joker had proposed to her. He had handed her an engagement ring, and he had said, "Till death do we part." However, in this moment, she now realizes, because again, Harleen is talking to her. Right. You know that's not how that happened. And she suddenly starts to remember it exactly how it did happen. The little string quartet that was playing music for them suddenly becomes Joker minions with guns. The engagement ring suddenly becomes the pin of a grenade that Joker was holding. And when he said, "Till death do us part," he wasn't looking at her. He was looking past her to Batman. And she realizes that Batman is actually the true love of Joker's life, not her. And so there was a need to save Batman, not just because Riddler couldn't get credit for killing him, but because Joker, and we've talked about this countless times, Joker genuinely seems to have affection for what Batman gives him. Yeah. Because no one gives him the adoration, quote unquote.
No one is more fixated on the Joker than the Batman.
Than Batman.
He is the love of his life. And I mean that in a sense that the attention that Batman gives him, all the things that I mentioned before that a narcissist wants, Batman gives and gives and gives and gives. So he's a great lover in the sense that for a narcissist, he's doing all the things that narcissist wants him to do.
Yeah.
And the sadness here is that the dream is broken, right? So Harley gets out of the vat of acid, realizes it's not acid, it's a margarita mix.
It's margarita mix. Because Ivy admits that she set this whole thing up in order to show Harley the very cruel truth, which is that he will never choose you over Batman.
Everyone also, so the reason why Batman runs after the Joker right after he's released and doesn't save Harley is that he knows this too.
Yeah, probably.
Everyone knows this. Harley's the only one who doesn't know the joke.
That being said, it's still bubbling. It's a boiling vat of margarita mix. She just dumped her into a boiling vat of any liquid. That's going to reach a certain temperature. It's going to be hot.
Yeah.
However, we get that this is a comedy.
Right. And so the dream is broken. No, you were never engaged. No, he didn't choose you.
Yeah.
No, you're not the love of his life. And I know you use the word delusion, but I think this is entrancement. This is another form in which an abuser keeps control and creates the narrative, the story of our life together, our love together, which is distorted.
But I do believe in that moment, she probably thought she saw those things. Like, do you not think so? Do you not think that something in her eschewed that vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she imagined those things differently, and for the purposes of an animated show, it was created that way, it was told that way. But I don't actually think she has delusions. I don't think that she has these beliefs that aren't grounded in reality to the degree that they're pathological, to the degree that they're persistent, to the degree that we'd say they're delusions. But I would say, yes, you're right. She has a distorted perspective of their relationship and nothing else. I don't think she has a distorted perspective of other things. It's just the relationship.
Yeah.
And it's her perspective, her framing of what happened is all around the context of he's choosing me when the opposite is happening. Right. So it's almost like you're filtering out. It's not a delusion. You're filtering out the information, the evidence that's telling you this person is controlling you and hurting you because to protect yourself, you have to do that.
Yeah.
So I see that as a little bit more complicated. But nonetheless, it's like the margarita mix, or rather probably being dumped, literally dumped by him, is giving her this clear realization that the majority of the relationship has been, in fact, her being victimized and used by this person, objectified by this person, and that there's someone else in their life that is even more important to them.
Right.
So that all happens within this kind of like this game that they all played in order for her to really understand what was going on.
Yeah. For now, she has snapped out of it appears. She attacks Joker. She makes it clear that she's now coming after his number one villain in Gotham City spot. She ends up killing all of his thugs and minions. And he's like, what are you gonna kill me now? And she's like, no, I want you to see when I overcome you as the number one foe in Gotham. And she even strips the facade that the Harley Quinn Harlequin facade, and she's now dressed in her own new outfit, which keeps the motif of the Harlequin, but is now her wearing what she is now feeling. You know, it's her independent self. So she is not only mentally but physically breaking away from what we've always known as Joker's number one, right hand assistant / victim.
I haven't quite figured out this look because there's an athletic kind of motif here with the pigtails and the baseball bat and the athletic shoes and the long socks. And this is somebody whose repertoire historically has been about the mind. She's a psychiatrist, very intellectual, interpersonally savvy, and yet her weapon, how she empowers herself, is very physical. So it's the bashing of the heads and using Joker's weapons to best them. She's not intellectualizing her power yet, and I find that really interesting. But it could very well be a sense of wanting to reclaim physical power.
Yeah.
This person physically oppressed me. This person physically abused me.
And let's be clear, it's not even just this person. Most people are probably going to look at dainty Harley Quinn and underestimate her physical strength.
Yeah. So I don't want to undermine her physical empowerment. I see that that's happening. But I'm excited to see where her intellectual empowerment
And I also saw the difference. You're right, that it's very athletic wear. We're not talking like sexy the way that Poison Ivy dresses more often than not in comics. Now, not in this show. In this show, Ivy's got a very cool like leather jacket, and she dressed modestly for a character who throughout her history has been all about seduction.
Yeah. Who wears like 2 leaves on her breast.
Correct. Yes. So Harley, the pigtails still go along with the Harlequin, the almost pigtail like with the bells. Like so she's maintaining the same silhouette, but she is stripping off the smothering neck to toe costume that represents the Joker and his
and what does that clown do? As Harley Quinn, what she did was she was entertainment. Yeah. Her body was used to create entertainment and delight for other people. That's the clown-esque motif, and she stripped that to become this new version of herself, which is it's a lot more freeing. It's liberating, it's empowering, and I'm noticing the athleticism around it. I think there's something to say about coming into her own that way. I do want to mention, I think the cake scene was an homage to the original Batman, the animated series, birthday cake scene.
Her first appearance in what I believe was the 22nd episode of Batman the Animated Series. I know the episode was called Joker's Favor. Mm-hmm. And that's when there's the big cake and the popping out of the cake.
Yeah.
And
even now, it's incredible to think about what they got away with in the early 90s with the physical battering of this woman, of this character.
Yeah.
You're not seeing that on this show. At least I didn't clock that. I didn't see.
There was a lot of physical, like her thugs, he does say kill her and we watch her get beaten. We see blood, but she very easily
it's different
takes care of them afterward.
When you see it in the original animated series, it's the Joker battering her.
Yeah.
You know, her landing outside on the sidewalk on her butt.
On her butt and skipping.
Yeah, like it's not implied.
Yeah.
It's much more obvious. It's much more explicit. And then even in serving him this cake, violence ensues. He's mad at her. He escalates the situation, which is exactly what happens in the original version. But I'm just noticing it's not as risky as the early 90s animation that I thought, was very, very eye-opening. Yeah. I don't think you could do that. I don't know if you can do that now.
No.
But this show is rated, what, PG-13 or R?
Oh, this is definitely MA.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
This would be television MA.
Yeah, so
just for all the language
they
and
can
violence,
actually get away with stuff.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to talk about is Commissioner Gordon.
I do want to talk about Commissioner Gordon.
What is going on with this poor man?
This might be, I'll be honest, this might be one of, if not my favorite interpretation of Commissioner Gordon that I've ever seen. And I don't think he would be.
He is, this man, we only see him a couple times.
He's strung out on coffee.
He is disheveled.
Yeah.
He's unbathed. His personal hygiene is poor.
But if you were the police commissioner of Gotham City and you had to rely on Batman, one guy, to save the day, your own police are incompetent, if not just full out corrupt. You're the one guy trying to hold the department together. This guy would be so strung out. This is probably the most realistic character in the entire show for me, because no one person can hold Gotham City together.
I'm really worried about him.
And yeah, there are some the dude's tired. And yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Well, if it hasn't been obvious, and I'm sure this has been said, the female characters are centered in this DC animated show. Batman was in this episode quite a bit, but it's not his story. The Joker is kind of a one note character, is
played brilliantly by Alan Tudyk.
So good. And he's in service to Harley's story. She's the core of the story. she's the main character. And I think that's what makes this very fresh and, quite I'd say an intentional way to, or maybe an intentional writing to get the female characters to kind of be a part of the main story.
And I think that you're absolutely right, especially when it comes to this episode. It's very female-centric. I think the show itself is going to be very female-centric. But as we move forward, and I realize we're not allowed to talk analytically about the future, but I can say, having seen a lot of season 1 years ago when it was first released, this also becomes a show about others, like people who would otherwise be othered in the community. And I think that that's a pretty strong take as well. We'll discuss it as we move forward, but there are characters who would not fit in anywhere else.
Oh, what you mean in Gotham City?
Well,
you got some misfits in Gotham
Yeah.
City?
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So how excited are you to take on the remaining? There were 13 episodes of this series. We're now down 1. How excited are you for the next dozen episodes of this show? And do you think that it's the show based on season 1, episode 1? Is this a show that our listeners are going to get a lot out of going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very, very excited about the rest of the season. And I think that we're going to have a lot to talk about. New themes, new ideas, new characters to talk about. I have a feeling that it's not going to be a repeat of what we covered in our very first season of the Arkham Sessions. For folks who haven't seen those episodes, go back if you want a deeper dive into the origins of Harley and Joker, because I'm not sure how much we're going to repeat here. Go back and check that out.
Yeah.
But that is actually one of the reasons I was hesitant to cover the Harley Quinn show. I was worried it would be
too repetitive.
Right? We'd be talking about the same ideas and themes and issues, and I don't know that that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I agree. I think that on the surface you think, oh, we're going to talk about abuse, we're going to talk about victimization, but in this case, it seems like actually what we're going to talk about is coming out of abuse and coming out of victimization and reclaiming your own life. And that's something that we never saw in Batman the Animated Series. And so I'm excited to tackle it now. It's as if time has decided to, the passage of time has decided to give us what we really need with that character and those characters.
Well, in wrapping this up, I do want to introduce a very short activity, just a small practice for folks who have felt their nervous system activate a little bit during this conversation, or maybe you've been thinking about things or processing something, or maybe none of the above. Maybe you just want to learn a new self-regulating tip.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk today about the safety bubble.
The safety bubble.
The safety bubble is
what the Riddler was holding Batman and Harley in over the vats of acid. Those are the safety bubbles.
Keep that image in your brain. Those are not actual safety bubbles, but keep that image in your brain of a bubble. And this is a reflective sensory activity for any one of us when we just need to kind of regain a sense of safety.
Okay.
And it's really, really easy to do. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the strategies and then give folks an opportunity to practice this now. Make yourself comfortable wherever you are. If you can, close your eyes or look down. Take a few deep, slow breaths. Notice any tension. Notice if it leaves your body or if it sits in your body somewhere. And just focus on breathing. Now, on your inhale, imagine a cleansing light entering through the top of your head like a crown. It can be any color, gold, white, anything that feels comforting. And imagine it fills your body and fills your belly with light. And then on your exhale, send that light around you as if you were building an imaginary bubble. Keep breathing. And as that bubble continues to expand, imagine someone, something, a pet, a person in your life that gives you comfort and safety, not one who's passed away because you don't want to introduce grief right now, but someone you feel safe with, or something or some pet you feel safe with, and use your senses to feel them with you. Is it the tone or sound of their voice? Is it the way they smell? Is it how they feel? And just latch on to what it is that reminds you of them. And as you breathe, imagine you're just breathing that aspect of them. And let that give you warmth and safety and comfort inside your bubble. Your bubble is about the size of your body with a few extra inches. It's not meant to make you feel tight. It's meant to make you have some room and some safety. And you can stay in this bubble for as long as you want, but usually about 30 to 60 seconds is enough for you to feel a sensory impact of your safety bubble. And when you're ready to come back, open your eyes, look around you, wiggle your toes, and let your bubble float away. Let it expand and dissipate. Anytime you feel the need for safety and security of your bubble again, just repeat that exercise. So that is the safety bubble.
That was very cool.
Hopefully it was helpful. For folks who want more information about survivorship, you can go to RAINN, that's RAINN.org, for more information. This is a good chance to let folks know we do have a Discord for the Arkham Sessions. It's a community that I monitor pretty closely, almost on a daily basis. If you're looking for other folks to connect with, create community, and talk about the show and its related topics, maybe like the topic we talked about today.
Excellent. Otherwise, where can folks find you online, Drea?
They can find me online on social media. On X/Twitter, I'm still at Arkham Asylum Doc, proudly.
Yeah.
Haven't changed that name, at Arkham Asylum Doc. And then on all the other social media platforms, I'm at Dr. Drea Psychology.
You can also find me. I am mostly on Instagram at B_Ward028. You can find us both on Instagram at The Arkham Sessions. Come join our Patreon over at patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and get your name shouted out like some of our good friends and folks. Here are Mike Ficklin, Aaron Wenrick, Dr. Jerome Anderson, our good friend Antonio Lopez, our dear friend Todd Stashwick, Kevin Ortel, our friends Hero's Journey Fitness, Trevor Schwartz, Mark Pepper, our dear friend Frank Muller, Swara Sali, our new friend Lindsay B, our new friend SK, Jamiroquai J, and of course my father, Carl Ward. Thank you all so much for your love and your support. You help make this episode and all of our episodes possible, and we very much appreciate it. You can join ArkhamSessions.com. Oh, I'm sorry. You can join patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and join the $5 tier to get your Patreon shout out. I will say that this shout out officially signifies the last of the 2020 challenge coins, Drea. We got a couple of new members who have just purchased the last of the 2020 challenge coins, which brings about the question, should we create 2025 challenge coins 5 years later? Maybe.
Oh my gosh, we totally should.
Yeah, maybe there's.
And what's going to go on the challenge coin? Is it going to be X-Men? Is it going to be Harley Quinn? Is it going to be Batman again?
Maybe other folks can send in their recommendations, but I have ideas.
Is it going to be Garfield?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. You never know.
If you know me, I really love Garfield.
This is true.
For folks who want the Discord link, just go to our Instagram at Arkham Sessions and you'll find...
At the Arkham Sessions.
I'm sorry,
yes.
at the Arkham Sessions on Instagram, and you'll find the Discord link in our bio.
Yep. Otherwise, follow our good friends over at Fanbase Press, and we look forward to covering more Harley Quinn as we move forward. Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
I can be around people now. I hate it, but I can do it without vomiting.